Well, welcome to all you guys joining us at our Northgate campus, our Madras campus, and to those of you who are watching online, we're real glad you're here today. If you hadn't been with us for the past couple of weeks, we're in a series where we're talking about what Jesus said was the most important thing in the whole world. Jesus said the most important thing is love. More specifically, loving God and loving other people. Jesus said everything else in this life is secondary to that one thing. In fact, Jesus went on to say that the defining characteristic of his followers would be that they would love one another. We've been talking about that. In fact, later on in your Bible, a guy named Paul, the Apostle Paul, who saw Jesus after he resurrected, he wrote some words about love, and we've been encouraging you to read this chapter. It's from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, and here's what Paul says about the whole thing. He says, if I could speak all the languages of earth and of angels, but I didn't love others, I'd only be a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I had the gift of prophecy, if I understood all of God's secret plans and I possessed all knowledge, and if I had such a faith that I could make mountains move, but I didn't love others, I'd be nothing. He says, if I gave my everything I have to the poor, if I even sacrificed my body, I could brag about that, he says, but if I didn't love other people, I would have gained nothing. And he goes on in that same chapter, and he says that there are three things in this life, he said, that really are going to last. He says there's faith, and faith is a big deal. You know, the Bible says that without faith, it's impossible for us to even please God. So that's huge. He says the second thing is hope, and hope is big because how do you get through the ups and downs of your life if you don't have hope? That's the second thing. But then he said there's the third thing. He said the third thing is love. He says those are the three big deals in this life, Paul says. And then he ends it, and he ends it with this final verse. He says three things will last forever, faith, hope, and love. He says, but the greatest of these three things is love. Now, it's one thing to know that. It's one thing to read that and to agree with it. It's a whole other thing to actually live like that's true. So today, here's what I want to do. I want us to talk about basically the more practical side of how to love people. In fact, I want you to think about something for just a moment. I want you to imagine for a moment that we were to be able to get into a time machine and we could travel forward in your life, and let's say that we went all the way to the very end of your life. In fact, let's just say we're at the very end. We're an hour before you die. And I know that's morbid, but play along, okay? And let's say that it's an hour before you're going to leave this earth, and we look back at your entire life and we just sort of reminisce over what's taken place in your life. And what if I were to ask you, tell me about the best times of your life, the highest highs, the most precious moments that you've experienced in all of your life. Now, I don't know most of you personally, but here's what I probably could guess about the conversation that you and I would have in that moment. My guess is you wouldn't talk to me about the first car you got. You probably wouldn't talk to me about that little starter house you bought and it was your first purchase. Or you wouldn't tell me about the promotion that you finally got at work that you really wanted. You probably wouldn't tell me about the awards that you won, the trophies that were sitting at your house, or the amount of money that you made. You wouldn't talk about that. I think if you had 1 hour to live and you talked about the best things in your life and we spent that whole hour talking about the best times, my guess is you talk to me about people. You talk to me about relationships. You talk about the people you loved. You talk about the people who loved you, that poured into your life, and the relationships that you had with those people. That's what you talk about. Now, you'd say things like, I remember that one Christmas, and the whole family got together, and we took that trip, and it was amazing, and I'll never forget it. You talk to me about the day your kids were born. You talk about your wedding day. You talk about your anniversary. You talk about that gathering when the family was together and things were good and there was a lot of love and there was a lot of laughter, and you'll never forget that day. In fact, even as I'm saying this, some of you are starting to bring some of those memories to your mind, and you're thinking about them, and admit it, they make you smile. They fill your heart with joy, right? You reminisce on that stuff. In fact, some of you are hoping that you can make some of those kind of memories right now because you're in the Christmas season and you're hoping you'll have some of those memories. You have those, right? That's what you think about, the best moments. Now, let's flip that around. Let's look at the other side of that coin. Let's say we're at the last hour of your life, and I were to ask you to bring to mind the low points. Tell me about the worst of the worst. Tell me about the times when your heart just felt like it was ripped out of your chest. Tell me about the times where you felt about as bad as a human being could possibly feel. Again, my guess is you wouldn't tell me about the first time you got a dent in that car. You wouldn't tell me about the promotion that you missed. You wouldn't talk about things like that. You wouldn't talk about not getting into that school or making that team or any of that kind of stuff. I think your lowest day would be something like this. The day you got served those divorce papers. Or the day that the judge made it final. You tell me about a day when you lost a family member. You talk about that moment when you or one of your kids were arguing with each other and they walked out the door and you didn't know if they'd come back. You talk about the day you heard a really good friend say, "I'm done with you. I don't want to see you again." And they walked away. See, here's my point. Some of your highest highs in life, they revolve around relationships when they're good. And most of your lowest lows are when relationships break apart and you lose them. So our lives are just made up. We've said this before. Your life is just a series of relationships. It's what your life is made up of. And see, at the heart of every relationship is love. I mean that's what relationships are all about. Love is the supreme value in relationships. So the question I think we ought to ask today is, how do we build that? How do I build and sustain loving relationships? How do I go about weaving love into the fabric of every relationship in my life? How do I build the kind of relationships that stand the test of time? How do I put love into practice so that when I get to the end of my life and I review the highs and the lows and I look back at all that, I'll see a lot more highs than I do lows. I'll see relationships that really do mean everything to me, that I was able to build and sustain and pour love into for the long haul. So today I want to talk to you about this whole idea of how do you love each other and keep that going? How do you build relationships like that? Because, see, you know this as well as I do. Love is a fragile thing when it comes to relationships, when it's between people. I mean, you know this. Love can break down in a second, with one word, in fact. And it takes you and I becoming real intentional about this, about how we love one another to keep all of that kind of thing from happening. So I want to talk to you about basically 5 principles. We're just going to go through 5 things that I think if you build into relationships, it'll guide you to be able to love people better. In fact, here's what I want to encourage you to do. We're going to go through these 5 principles. I encourage you to take that note sheet that's in your program and write these down. Take good notes today. And as we go through this, I want you to grade yourself on them. I don't care how you do it, but just grade yourself and figure out, how am I doing on this principle? How am I doing at building love into relationships in this area? And when you find an area that you say to yourself, you know what, I'm struggling on that, or I'm lacking in that, I don't see this as much in my life as I used to or as I like to, make a note of it, because that's your next step. We're going to take next steps at the end of this, and that'll be your next step of what you need to do. Because, see, the truth is, you're about to go into a season where you're really going to have to put this into practice. I mean, isn't it true that just around the holidays, a Christmas season like this, you wind up hanging out with people that you really do love? It's the people that you often say you love the most, but truth is, some of those people they become the hardest people for you to love sometimes. And you need to get this going. You need to figure this out now before you do any kind of damage so that you can be prepared for those kind of interactions. So here we go. First principle. And this first principle is kind of tough to put into a phrase, but we'll just do it this way. We'll use this phrase. I call it love above all else. I'll explain that more in a second, but let me read a verse from the Bible that sort of sums this up. 1 Peter 4 says, "Most important of all, continue to show deep love for each other, because love covers a multitude of sins." Now, here's how you can sort of grade yourself on this, on how you're doing. Ask yourself this question. Is love the most dominant value in my relationships? And this is different depending on which relationship you're thinking about, but you just pick a relationship that you have and ask this question. Does love overshadow every other thing in this relationship? Has it become the supreme value, or is there something else in this relationship that's more important to me than loving and showing love to this person? Now, I want you to notice what it says in that verse we just read. It says, love covers a multitude of sins. In other words, that means a lot of things can go wrong in a relationship, and you know that's true. Lots of things happen. Things get said. Stuff goes wrong. Feelings get hurt. Stuff happens. The question is, does love cover over that? Does love take precedence over whatever happens between me and the person that I love? Here's another way to think about this. Think about a relationship and ask yourself this question. Over what things am I willing to break a relationship over? What are the things that I'm just willing to throw in the towel, walk away, be done with? Think about a list of those kind of things that I would just be done. Is it a messed up situation between you and a person at work? Is it a rumor that might get started between you and that person? Is it money? Is it that lawnmower that he borrowed from me and now he broke it? Whatever, a joke that somebody tells and you didn't think it was all that funny. Whatever that thing is, whatever you'd be willing to say, you know what? That's it. That's enough for me. Whatever that thing is, that is becoming the dominant thing in your relationship. See, when love is the dominant thing in a relationship, you know what happens? You fiercely protect the relationship above anything that comes into it, anything that comes between the two of you. That list of things that you'll break relationship over, that you'll break love over, if love is becoming the dominant value, that list of things gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And you come to the point where no matter what happens between you and this person, whatever goes wrong, you're able to say, you know what? That was a bad thing. That hurt me, or I disagree with that, and that was not the way I wanted that to go. But you know what? I will not give up love because of that. It's not worth it to me. I value this relationship with this person above all else. More than I value what was said, more than I value what was done to me, I value this relationship. I'll give you some examples. You ever been in a situation where you're talking to a friend or somebody you're in a relationship with and they'll say something to you? I have this. They'll say something to you and, come on, they just tick you off, right? They say something that hurts you or offends you. And you have a decision in that moment. You have a decision to make. You have to decide, is that worth me breaking the relationship over? Is that worth me walking away from? Is that too much for me to handle, or am I gonna deal with that? Like, for instance, I've had friends share, it's just in passing, they'll share opinions with me, political opinions, social opinions, all kinds of stuff. And I'll find out in that moment, you know what, me and this person, we are on different ends of the spectrum. I do not agree with this person. And I have a choice. Do I start an argument right here? Do I say something that I'm pretty sure is not going to help either one of us and is certainly not going to change either one of our minds? Or do I just keep my mouth shut for the sake of this friendship? See, I got people in my life right now that I love dearly. They owe me money, and I bet you they've forgotten about it. It just happens, you know? And see, the truth is, I could go to them and I can make a big deal out of it. I could show them that I'm offended and I could get all self-righteous about that. But you know what? I'm not. Why don't I do that? Because it's not about money. This relationship is more important to me than that. Love is the dominant value. And so I don't care. I'm not going to break up a relationship over something as petty as that, because that's not the dominant value. The point of this is the point of all I'm saying. When love becomes the dominant value in a relationship, that list of things that will cause you to break the relationship is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And when that happens, love begins to cover over a multitude of sins and a multitude of offenses. I tell my kids this all the time. I have 2 girls, and I go to my girls and I'll say, look, sweetheart, there is nothing you can say, there is nothing you can do to me that'll ever make me stop loving you. I will never break relationship with you. You will always be my kid, no matter what. You can do anything, you can say anything. It's the same thing I meant when I took my vows to my wife. Those vows were serious. And when I said those vows, I meant it. Nothing you ever say, nothing you ever do will ever cause me to break relationship with you. Now, do we argue? Of course we do. Do we disagree about things? Absolutely. Do we hurt each other? Oh yeah. In fact, I'm probably more guilty of that than she is. I'm sure of it. But the option to end the relationship over any of those things, it's not even on the table. It doesn't even enter the room. It's done. It's not even there. Because why? Love overshadows the relationship. Love covers over everything for me. So you just think about your relationships. How you doing on this one? Is love above everything else? Is it becoming the dominant value in your relationships? Is your list of deal breakers getting smaller with this person, or is it getting longer? Because the more love dominates a relationship, the stronger the relationship becomes. It's the only way that love stays alive over the long haul. It's when love becomes the dominant value. So that's the first principle. Second principle is this, is speak the truth in love. Ephesians 4:15 says this. It says, instead, we will speak the truth in love, growing in every way more and more like Christ. Man, I think words are the most important element in a relationship. I really do. I mean, think about it. What causes a relationship to start? What causes a relationship to grow? What can cause a relationship to end? What builds a relationship? It's words. It's the words that we say. It's the way that we express our words to each other. It's the stuff that we say to one another. You can keep relationships alive just by saying the right words. You can tear a relationship apart by saying the wrong words or by saying the right words in the wrong way. We have to learn, how do I say the right words at the right time in the right way? And when we can do that, we build relationships that last. I mean, think about it. Most of the time when a relationship breaks down, it's often because somebody in the relationship refused to speak truth. Or whenever they did decide to speak truth, they used words that weren't driven by love. I mean, think about it this way. You look back on your life to relationships that you've had that didn't last, okay? Think about something that went wrong. The relationship got strained or whatever, and it caused the relationship to drift or to break apart. I guarantee you that the majority of those relationships died or got strained because someone in the relationship, maybe you, maybe the other person, but someone in the relationship was unable to speak truth. Truth like this. Hey, you've hurt me, and we need to talk about it. Hey, things aren't right between us. Can we sit down and have a conversation because I don't want this to go on any longer? Or how about these words? I'm sorry. And see, because we can't say those words, we let our hurt feelings go underground, and we just don't say anything, and we just sort of let it, we just keep going, and we bury that kind of stuff. We just hope that things will get better, or we'll get over it, and we just don't deal with it. And the truth is, they never do, because the point is, when hurt goes underground, when you bury hurt underneath, it stays there, and it doesn't just stay there, it actually grows. And then you get in this relationship where you've got some buried offense or some buried hurt, and you're around this person, and they can't help it. They just keep doing things that remind you of the hurt. It's just the nature of relationships. And the hurt just stays, and it grows until the moment when finally something gets said or something happens, and you're finally ready to talk about it. You've held it in long enough, and so the truth comes to the surface all in one moment. But see, now you're ready to talk about it, but now you don't have any love attached to those words. I mean, you speak a lot of truth in that moment, right? But you don't speak very much love at all, if any, because you've held in that emotion and you've allowed it to fester. You know, I have to confess, I don't practice this as much as I ought to. I mean, I wish I did, but I don't. My guess is you probably don't either. But I can say that the times that I get this right, the times when I've done it right, my relationships grow stronger because of it almost every time. In fact, I can't tell you of a time when I've regretted coming to a person that I loved and saying words like, hey, you know, what you said or what you did, you hurt me, and I need to talk to you about it. And I don't want things to be like this between us anymore. Can we work on this? Can we fix this? I've never regretted that. Or times when I've come to somebody and said, hey, listen, I love you too much. I think you're off track. I think you're headed in the wrong direction, and I can't just let that happen. I care too much. Can we talk about that? Now, did those situations always turn out the way I wanted them to? Absolutely not. But I never regret speaking truth in love. Never. So how are you doing on that one? Are you speaking truth to people? And are you doing it with a humble, loving kind of spirit? Because that's so important. In fact, my guess is some of you listening to me right now, you've got some truth that needs to be spoken in a relationship that you're in right now, and you've been putting it off for a while, and you hadn't said anything, and you need to decide today, I'll speak up. And I'll do it with the right heart. I'll do it with a loving spirit. Here's the third principle. Love is not easily angered. That chapter in 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter, says that love is not irritable, and it keeps no record of being wronged. You know, when I was a kid, my parents gave me this gift. It was a blow-up punching bag. You guys may remember these things. There were these, they had maybe a superhero character on them or some kind of character, and you blow them up, and they'd stand up, you know, about as tall as I was when I was a kid, and it was weighted down with sand on the bottom. And you could punch that thing as hard as you wanted to, and the thing would fall all the way to the ground, but then it would pop right back up. You remember those things? I used to play with that all the time in my room. I'd hit that thing as hard as I could. I'd knock it down just to see how far I could knock it to the ground, and then every time it would just come right back up. I could hit that thing all day long. You couldn't knock it down. It just kept coming right back up. Now, listen to me, before I even say this, I'm not advocating that you ought to be the kind of person that you could just stand there and take abuse over and over again. That's not at all what I'm saying. You should never do that. But here's what I am saying. There's something to be said for being someone who is resilient when you're in a relationship. In fact, think about it this way. You ever tried to be in a relationship with somebody who just kind of gets offended all the time? Somebody that just gets so easily provoked, easily angered. Someone who gets irritated at you at the slightest little thing. You ever try to be in a relationship with somebody like that? Someone who's the opposite of that punching bag. It's like every time they get hit, they fall down, but they don't come back. They don't bounce back up. They don't have the ability when they're hurt or offended to bounce back. It's that person in your life that every time you're around them, you feel like you're walking on eggshells, and you're always measuring your words, and you're thinking to yourself, if I say this, are they going to take this the right way? And I hope I'm saying this the right way, and I hope they're not offended at what I just said, or I hope they're not offended at what I'm doing, or that person that you're always worried, are they going to be hurt if I don't include them in this? Or person that if you don't call every so often, they're mad at you. Or the person that if you don't like their Facebook posts, they're mad at you. It's that person that you wind up saying this around them a lot. You're always saying, hey, are you okay? Are we all right? Did I say something? Did I do something? You all know people like that. We all have people like that in our lives. You know what? Let me tell you something. You know what characterizes a relationship like that? You may never thought about it this way. A relationship like that is always characterized by fear, not love. It's fear. It's always, I'm fearful of hurting you, or I'm fearful that the relationship might end if I don't do or say the right thing. I walk around in fear all the time because I'm not sure that our relationship is secure. It's a relationship built on fear. Did I say the right thing? Will they be offended? And we almost always feel this tremendous responsibility for people like this. We carry around that burden. Now, so what's the application on this one? And this one's different. Because, see, you're not responsible for a person like that in your life. That's not your deal. In fact, people come to me all the time and they ask me relationship issues. I got this problem in a relationship and I need help. And I always say the same thing. I say, you know what? The only person you can control in a relationship is you. That's the truth. So here's the question on this one. It's not what are they doing. It's about what are you doing? What am I doing? How are we doing at becoming the kind of person that is not easily angered? Not easily offended. See, my responsibility is I need to become the kind of person that when I get knocked down or I get knocked around a little bit and I get my feelings hurt from time to time, because it happens, I can come back time and time again. It doesn't completely throw me when something bad happens in a relationship or I get hurt. I don't bail out on the relationship at the slightest little thing. Now, that's tough because you know how this happens? See, a lot of people don't realize how you go about becoming that kind of person. You know how you become a person like that? It all flows out of your relationship with God every single time. See, if you can become the kind of person that is so secure in your relationship with God, so secure in the love that God has for you, then when human love lets you down, you don't budge. You don't get knocked completely off your feet. You're not destroyed. Why? Because your foundation was not them in the first place. The foundation of your life is not that relationship, it's God. And you start to become the kind of person that when another human being lets you down, or another human being hurts you, or they offend you, you become the kind of person that's able to say, wow, that's interesting. A human being let me down. That's interesting. That's what they all do. Because the reason I can say that is because that's what I do. I let you down. I let people down. I hurt people. I offend people. But I'm sure glad that's not how it is between me and God. I'm so glad that my stability is in Him, and my life is not based on other people. So see, I'm okay when people don't come through. I'm okay when people hurt me. I'm not so easily knocked over because I have something else that's way more stable, and it's holding my life up. And I can weather those kind of storms. So rate yourself on this one. Are you becoming a person who is not so easily angered or offended or knocked off track when another person causes you to feel that way? Are you more secure in God's love today than you are in the love of someone else or some kind of other human relationship? And that's the third principle. Here's the fourth one. Rapid reconciliation. Ephesians 4 says, don't sin by letting anger control you. And don't let the sun go down while you're still angry. And I've heard a lot of people use this for great relationship advice. It is great relationship advice. But here's the thing. That wasn't meant to be taken literally. A lot of people say, well, you can't go to bed while you're angry. Well, sometimes that's impossible. But that's not what the writer here was trying to tell us. He was trying to give us a principle. And here's all he was trying to say. He wasn't giving us a new rule. The point he's trying to make is, look, whenever there's anger, whenever there's conflict between you and someone else, speed is important. Speed's important. There ought to be a sense of urgency. When you know things aren't right between you and another person, you ought to be fast about it. Look at what Jesus said. Jesus said it this way. He said, if you're presenting a sacrifice at the altar, in other words, if you're in worship, just like some of you are right now, sitting in church, if you're at the temple and you suddenly remember someone has something against you, you leave your sacrifice there at the altar and you go and you be reconciled to that person. Then come back and offer your sacrifice to God. What's he trying to say? Jesus is simply saying this. He's saying there is something more important than religious activity. He says there's something more important than you coming to church and you worshiping and taking communion and listening to sermons or whatever it is that you do. He says when you have a broken relationship, when things aren't right between you and someone else, when you're holding a grudge, when you're holding an offense, that ought to be of the utmost importance in your life, and you ought to fix that, and you ought to fix it fast. Now, why does he say fix it fast? Because you know this is true just as well as I do. The longer you let a relationship stay bruised, the worse that relationship is going to get. When you realize something's wrong, before you go do anything else, you ought to move to make that thing right as fast as you can. You let that be the number one priority of your life until it's done. In fact, Jesus gives us instructions on how to do this. In fact, what I'm about to teach you, it's the most practical part of this whole message. This is the most helpful thing I'm probably going to give you today. If everybody here could just put these three things, these three instructions that Jesus gives us into practice, I guarantee you it would make your relationships 100% better. Here's how Jesus said we ought to do it. He says, if there's someone, another believer sins against you, someone that hurts you, he says, go privately. Point out the offense. If that person listens and confesses it, you've won them back. But if you're unsuccessful, take one or two others with you and go back again so that everything may be confirmed by 2 or 3 witnesses. If the person still refuses to listen, then take your case to the church. If he or she won't accept the church's decision, treat them like you would a pagan or a corrupt tax collector. Here's what Jesus is saying essentially. Jesus is saying basically there are 3 principles to reconciliation that you ought to live by. You and me ought to live by these 3 things. This is what love does. First thing he says is you ought to be, when stuff is not right between you and somebody else, you ought to be the first one to go. You make the effort. You make the first move. To which most of us say, now wait a minute, what if they're the one in the wrong? What if it's not my fault? What if I didn't do anything wrong? You go anyway. That's what love does. Love doesn't act that way. Love goes first. And see, if you need an example of how this works, if you need an example, listen, all you have to do is just look at what Jesus did. I mean, you think about the relationship between us and God. We broke the relationship. We were the ones who sinned. We offended God. And did God wait for us to come to him? No. He came to us. I mean, come on, that's what this season is all about. That's what Christmas is, what we celebrate. God didn't wait for us to get it right. God didn't wait for us to come looking for him. God came in the form of his son. He put on flesh and blood, and he came looking for us. He took the initiative to reconcile the relationship that was broken by us. Why? Because that's what love does. So when a relationship gets broken between you and another person, love requires you go directly to that person. You make it right. Second thing Jesus says we ought to do is he says go in private. And see, that's more than just the setting where you have the conversation. What Jesus is saying is just keep it between the two. You don't bring other people into it. That means you don't run to your spouse, and you don't go to your connection group, and you don't go to your coworkers, and you try to see if you can get as many people on your side and tell them your story so that they'll back you up. You don't ask other people to go pray for your broken relationship. I mean, whenever somebody gets offended by me, and it happens a lot, if that person that gets offended by me, if they do this, if they keep this between the two of us, that's always a sign to me, oh, this person really cares about this relationship more than they care about being right. This person truly cares about me. When someone gets offended by me and they go talk to a whole bunch of other people and they cloud other people's opinion of me before they ever talk to me about it, it's an instant signal to me that person cares more about what their offense. They care more about other things than they care about this relationship. It's so important. Keep it private, just between the two of you. You work it out between the two of you for as long as you can possibly do that. You keep it private. And then the third thing Jesus says is when we do this, we got to always have the right spirit. Notice, when Jesus is talking about this, he says, hey, if you do this right, he says, you're going to win that person back. Because, see, that's the goal. That's the whole goal. The goal is not for you to prove a point. The goal is not for you to place blame. It's not for you to vent frustration. It's not about you being right even. The goal is just about reconciliation. So whenever you approach someone to try and make something right, your heart and your spirit always needs to be leaning toward no other agenda except for reconciliation. And see, what I've found is if you truly do this, if you approach someone with that kind of a heart and that humble spirit, if that's your only agenda, is I just want to make this right. I don't want to vent. I don't want to be right. I just want us to be okay. You start with that in your heart. Most of the time, you're going to get there. Most of the time. Well, here's the fifth and final principle, and this is what you got to live out to keep love alive. You have to learn how to forgive and move on. This is so important. A person who cannot forgive, I'm telling you, is a person who will constantly be falling in and out of relationships for their life. That if you can't forgive, you're going to have a hard time keeping and maintaining relationships, because that's what love requires. Ephesians 4 says, be kind to each other, tenderhearted, and forgive each other, just as God, through Christ, forgave you. And I know this is always the part of, every time I talk about this subject, it's the part where people start to say, well, give me the microphone and let me tell you my story, because if I told you about what he did to me, or if I told you about what she said about me, you'd never ask me to forgive them. You know what? You're probably right. And here's the thing. I've heard so many stories that I get to the end of them and I listen to what's been done to some people and the way they've been hurt in their life, and I think to myself, I don't think I would forgive if I were you either. I mean, I get it. I mean, I get it. We could do a whole series just on forgiveness and talk about that thing. But let me just share with you one thing that I've just sort of come to learn about this whole deal. I've watched people who were unwilling to forgive and forget some of the things in their life that were just minor. But I've also seen people forgive things that would make your story and my story seem like nothing. Huge offenses done, some of the worst crimes imaginable, and I've seen people forgive those things, stuff that would make us just amazed. And out of all of that stuff that I've seen, here's the one thing I'm convinced of. You will never know how to forgive until you know what it's like to be forgiven. You'll never know how to forgive. You'll never be able to forgive until you've experienced forgiveness yourself. And I can't explain to you how this works. I can't. I just know it does. All I know is that when When someone takes a deep look inside of their own heart, their own life, and they see who they are, who they really are. When someone comes to the point where they realize, I'm a sinner, and I have offended God. I have sinned and separated myself from a holy God. And God gave the life of his Son, who suffered and died on a cross just so that he could come to me and say, your debt is paid. I forgive you. When people do that, when people truly experience that, the more they embrace that forgiveness from God, the more you do that, the more you're able to forgive and extend that to the people in your life. In fact, the Bible teaches us real clearly that if you ever find yourself and you're getting less and less able to forgive the people in your life, you need to be real concerned, because that is a clear sign to you that you haven't fully accepted God's forgiveness of you. In other words, you can't have one and not do the other. You can't be truly forgiven from God and be unwilling to forgive the people in your life. It can't happen. And if you've never experienced that before, if you've never known God's forgiveness, listen, the only thing standing in your way is you. That's it. You need to repent. All that means is you just need to change your heart. You need to change your mind. You need to turn away from everything in your life that you know to be sin at this moment. And you need to turn toward God. You need to stop trying to earn God's favor. You need to try to stop earning God's love. You need to stop trying to be a good person, because you're not a good person. Neither am I. None of us are good. And you need to place all of your trust, you need to place all of your weight on Jesus and allow him to pay your debt with God, the debt you owe to him. And you just trust him. You trust him that he's right about everything. You trust him to lead your life, and you can do that right here, right now. I mean, that's the part that's just between you and God. That's the private part. You can do that right where you sit. But if you're serious about that, and you truly experience that, and you truly trust Jesus, the Bible teaches us that if that's true about you, you'll obey him. You'll take that decision that you've made and you'll make it public. You'll tell somebody. You'll be baptized in water, and you'll signify that you've been forgiven and that you've come back to live a brand new life. And if that's you today, I just want to encourage you. I want to invite you. On the back of your connection card, you should have gotten that when you came in. You've heard us talk about this already. On the back of your connection card, right there on the right-hand side, it says, I'm beginning a relationship with Jesus. I want to invite you, if that's you today, to check that box. And here's the only thing that'll happen. You check that box, we're not going to bug you, but we'll just contact you. And we'll help you take those next steps of beginning to experience the relationship that God offers to us through Jesus, and you experience that forgiveness. Now, maybe that's not you today, and maybe it's time for you to take another next step. You'll see on the left-hand side of that card, we've got several of them here today. If you're here for the first time, every week we take next steps at the end of messages so that we're not just hearing God's word, but we're actually putting it into practice. We're actually doing something about it. So I want to encourage you to look at some of these and check one of those boxes. Maybe you saw one of those principles that we talked about today, and you said, you know what, I need to work on one of these. And that's your next step for this week. Maybe your next step is just to simply come back, or to just begin to read along with us as we read in the scriptures about what love is really about, 1 Corinthians 13, or maybe it's to memorize that verse, whatever it might be. You check one of those boxes, and again, it's not for us to bug you. We're not going to contact you about those things. We'll just be praying for you, because we know it's a good thing to take a physical step sometime and to try and put things into practice. And again, if you're here for the very first time, man, we are so glad you're here. We're honored, in fact, that you came to be with us as our guest today. And we're hoping that you'll fill that connection card out and you'll drop it in the offering when it's passed around. You don't have to, but we sure would be honored if you did. In fact, that's the only thing that we're asking you to give us today. We're really honored that you're here. We hope you had a great experience. In fact, I want to invite you to come back again next week as we learn this together. We're glad you're here. Now, before we end today, let me just pray for us. Would you bow your heads? Heavenly Father, I want to thank you for your perfect love that you show to us. Love that shows us how we ought to be loving others. And God, my prayer today is that all of us would take a close look at how we're doing in all of these areas today and how we're really loving the people in our lives. And if we see that there's a need for improvement, God, I pray we'll follow your lead and we would just learn how to love better the way you love us, that we would learn how to speak truth, that we would forgive the way you've forgiven us. In Jesus' name, amen.